The sun was setting behind the ridge when Jonas rode into the yard. The last light of day spread across the dry valley in a pale, tranquil glow. His horse moved slowly forward, its breath visible in the cool air, and Jonas felt a familiar ache in his shoulders from carrying his traps. All afternoon, he had expected the usual silence, the stillness he always welcomed after days spent alone. But something on the ground near the cabin door stopped him before he even reached the tethering post. There were faint, uneven, desperate tracks. Jonas stood in one a moment longer, forcing his heart to calm. The prints weren't human. They were too narrow, too scattered, as if someone had stumbled and caught themselves. A small set of footprints followed closely behind, tiny marks barely imprinted in the earth. He saw where knees had sunk in, one deeper than the other, as if someone had slowly lowered themselves and remained there for a moment. Jonas dismounted, his boots touching the ground silently. He felt the loose reins as he crouched, running 2 fingers along the edge of a footprint. The shape told him enough. A slender woman, a small child, exhausted, probably starving. He felt a deep tug in his chest, not fear but a worry heavy enough to slow his breathing. The cabin door was ajar, just enough to catch his eye. That door never stayed open unless he deliberately left them that way, and Jonas always double-checked before leaving. His hand instinctively found the butt of his revolver in its holster without drawing it. Not yet. He took a step toward the door, another into it. The room was dark, the last rays of light sliding off the floorboards. The fire in the fur had shrunk to faint orange embers. At first, Jonas saw nothing. Then his eyes adjusted. A woman stood in the corner near the wall, her back half turned, a child clutched to her chest. Her legs were aching, her shoulders trembling with exhaustion. She turned at the sound of his footsteps, and Jonas met her gaze. A fear that had been building for days, perhaps weeks, held together only by the small weight of the child she was protecting. He froze, not out of fear, but so she wouldn't be frightened. The woman cleared her trembling throat with difficulty. Her voice came out thin, raspy with dryness. "Please, my daughter, she needs to eat." Her eyes never left him. Her arms tightened around the little girl, whose head rested limply against his shoulder. The child couldn't have been more than 4 years old. Jonas saw how shallow her breathing was, how close she seemed to faint. Maya, he didn't know her name yet, shifted her feet slightly, adjusting the child's weight despite the instability of her own legs. "I can offer myself," she continued, barely audible, "if you feed it." Jonas felt something heavy settle within him, a sharp awareness of his despair. He didn't step forward. He didn't reach out. He only raised his left hand, palm open to show he meant no harm. "No," he said, his voice low, steady, controlled. "Not that. Your daughter is eating, you both eat, that's all." He saw confusion cross her face, then disbelief. The fear didn't disappear, but it eased just enough so she could breathe without trembling so much. Jonas walked slowly to the table, keeping his distance, and set down what food he had: bread, a bowl of stew, half a boiled potato. The smell filled the room. The child moved weakly, sensing the heat or the food or both. "You can sit down," Jonas said gently. "Let her eat." Maya didn't move right away. Her mind was racing. He could see it in the tension in her hands, in the way she positioned her body to protect the child. She wondered if he was dangerous, if she'd made a mistake coming here. Jonas stepped back near the door, giving her space, allowing her to she watched his every move. Finally, she stepped forward and sat down in the chair. Her knees nearly buckled when she placed the little girl on her lap. Her hands were trembling so much that she had to steady the child twice before giving her a tiny spoonful of gossip. Ona opened her mouth slowly. A small sound escaped her throat. A faint whimper, neither quite a cry nor quite relief. Watching them, Jonas felt something stir within him. He remembered the weight of the silence after his wife's death, the stillness that had seeped into this cabin for years. He remembered the sound of a child breathing, the sound of someone dependent on him. He exhaled slowly and leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed loosely so as not to appear threatening. His mind ran through the questions. Where had she come from? Who had hurt her? Were they close? But he pushed them away for now. The priority was simple. Let them breathe, let them eat, let them be safe for at least one night. Maya was feeding the tiny baby. She was mouth to mouth, watching Jonas with wary eyes the whole time. Every move she made was cautious, ready to flee if he so much as faltered. Jonah remained still. He didn't hurry her. He didn't speak again until the bowl was nearly empty. "You'll take the bed tonight," he said evenly. Her eyes widened slightly, unsure of how to react. "I'll sleep by the wood stove," he added. "It's warmer there anyway." Something crossed her face, a mixture of confusion, fear, and a small, buried relief she wasn't ready to accept. But she didn't refuse. She didn't argue. She only held her daughter a little tighter and nodded once. Jonas turned to the wood stove, adding 2 more logs and adjusting the damper so the room would warm up slowly. As he worked, he found himself listening to Maya's breathing, which grew steady with each passing moment. He hadn't planned on going home with someone. He hadn't planned on feeling something awaken within him again. But tonight, someone else was breathing beneath his roof. And Jonas knew, as he sat down by the woodpile and watched the fire catch, that nothing in this cabin would ever be the same again. The fire in the woodpile burned steadily, the orange glow spreading slowly across the planks as Jonas settled down by the hearth. He didn't lie down right away. He kept his eyes open, listening to the soft, uneven breathing coming from the bed. Maya sat on the edge. Her daughter huddled against her chest, her posture stiff, as if the slightest movement might awaken danger instead of comfort. Jonas kept his hands resting loosely on his knees, with no sign of haste, no sudden movements. He understood enough to know that she was wondering if he was safe. He had seen that look on people who had run too far, too long. "You can sleep," he said, low, steady voice. "The door is locked. No one will come in." Maya didn't answer right away. Her head tilted slightly, studying her in the dim light of the fire. Her eyes reflected such profound fatigue that she seemed not to have slept properly for weeks. Her shoulders were tense beneath her torn dress, and she clutched her daughter tightly in both arms as if even the softness of a blanket wouldn't be enough to protect her. Finally, she spoke in a strained, low voice. "Why are you helping us?" Jonas's jaw tightened, and he took a slow breath before answering. "Your daughter needs rest, food, warmth. That's reason enough." Maya looked down as if she didn't know how to accept an answer without hidden conditions. She cradled her daughter gently, and the movement was so careful that Jonas felt his heart clench. He looked away to give her space. "I won't take anything from you," Jonas said after a moment. "I meant it." Maya's fingers stroked her daughter's hair. "Men don't help for nothing," she murmured, the words flat, shaped by experience more than belief. Jonas didn't reply immediately. He understood the weight behind her words, the history that had formed them. He changed position on the ground, stretching out a leg as if to settle down for the night. He showed her he had no intention of getting closer. "You won't hear that from me," he said finally. The wind pushed gently against the cabin walls, the planks creaking familiarly. Jonas watched the fire catch with the new logs, and warmth slowly filled the small room, softening the bite of the cold. After a long silence, Maya finally lay down on the bed. She didn't stretch out completely. She kept her knees slightly bent, her daughter nestled against her stomach. Jonas noticed she slept on the far side, facing the wall, positioning herself to protect the child with her body. Her breathing changed, still tight but slower. Jonas lay down on the old blanket near the fur, the cold planks beneath his shoulder despite the fabric. He had slept in worse places. He remained motionless, staring at the ceiling beams, listening to the small noises in the cabin, the round glow of the fire, the faint moan of a child stirring in its sleep. The light rustling Maya adjusted the blanket around her. He felt something unusual awaken, an awareness that the cabin no longer seemed as empty as it had been. He wasn't yet sure if this feeling was good or dangerous, but it was there, settling quietly deep within his mind. A few minutes passed before Maya spoke again, her voice slightly muffled by the blanket. "What's your name?" Jonas turned his head toward the bed, though he couldn't see her clearly in the dim light. "Jonik." Another short silence stretched out. "Aya," she murmured. "My daughter's name is Ona." He glanced once, even though she couldn't see him. "Rest, Amya. Are you safe here tonight?" She didn't answer, but he heard her exhale. A long, controlled breath that told him she'd let go of a small piece of her fear just for the moment. Jonas closed his eyes. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But he knew one thing clearly: he didn't regret opening the door. Dawn arrived slowly on the valley. A pale light filtered through the small window of the cabin and fell in soft bars onto the floor. Jonas woke before the sun was fully up, a habit deeply ingrained over the years. His back ached slightly from sleeping on the floor, but he sat up silently, careful not to make a sudden noise. The first thing he checked was the bed. Amya hadn't moved much. She was curled up around her daughter, one arm around the child's waist. The small hand rested against her mother's collarbone, the fingers gently curled. They were both still asleep, their breathing slow and steady. For the first time since their arrival, Amya's face was no longer caught between fear and exhaustion. The tension around her eyes had softened in sleep. Jonas stayed a moment longer than he had planned, watching them with slow breathing he didn't quite understand. Something in that view settled within him, calm and tranquil. He went out to fetch water before she woke up. The cold air hit him immediately. Frost clung to the grass and the edge of the bucket near the well. His boots crunched softly in the thin layer of ice as he pumped water into the bucket. The familiar gestures grounded him. Work had always done that. Work meant control, routine, something he knew how to handle. But he couldn't stop thinking about the woman and child inside his cabin. How thin the little girl's wrists were. How Amya's voice had broken with strain, the way she looked at him like someone who had been hunted. Jonas carried the water inside. The cabin was still silent. He set the bucket down by the door and went to the fire to start a small fire. The match crackled, and the flame caught on the wood in a slow, steady tongue, until the heat spread once more throughout the narrow room. Only then did Amya begin to move. Her eyes opened abruptly. Instinct, not surprise. Then she relaxed, seeing Jonas near the fur and the door still locked. She checked on her daughter next, running a hand through her hair. Ona blinked at the light, her small face less sunken than the day before. Jonas kept his voice calm. "There's water if you want to wash up. Dinner will be ready soon." Amya sat up slowly. Her muscles were aching from sleeping in a tense position. She hugged her daughter tightly as if she wasn't sure it was safe to leave. Jonas noticed her hesitation. "You can use the basin," he added. "I'm going out, take your time." She watched him for a moment, trying to read him. His eyes weren't as sharp as the day before, but still cautious. When Jonas headed for the door, Elcha finally looked up. "Thank you," she said softly. Jonas got out, closing the door behind him. He stayed on the small porch, watching the frost melt in the rising sun. He rubbed his hands together, partly to warm them, partly because he didn't know what else to do with this strange feeling of having someone else in his house. After several minutes, he heard the door open behind him. Amya came out with Ona on her hip, her long, damp hair pulled back. She had wrapped herself in one of Jonah's blankets while her dress dried near the fur. Her skin looked clean, though the bruises on her wrists and arms stood out darker now. Jonas first noticed her posture, still defensive, but no longer looking for the quickest way out. Ona reached a sleepy hand toward Jonah's coat, curiosity replacing the weakness that had almost overwhelmed him the day before. Jonas looked at her, a slight tug in his chest. "She seems stronger," he said softly. Amya shook her head, brushing a strand of hair away from her daughter's face. "She hasn't eaten enough in days." She was pacing back and forth. Jonas's stomach clenched at the thought. "I'll make something hot," he said, period. "Go inside, it's cold outside." Amya hesitated before she walked past him, her eyes lingering on his for a brief moment. This time she didn't look away out of fear. She looked away, as if she were getting used to the idea of letting someone help her. Inside, Jonas placed a small saucepan on the stove and stirred together what he had. Oats, a little dried fruit, and enough water to soften them. The room warmed, filled with a sweeter aroma than yesterday's stew, but just as comforting. While he stirred, Amya sat down at the table with her daughter on her lap. The morning light through the window softened the angles of her face. She gently ran her fingers down her daughter's back, her shoulders finally a little relaxed now that she no longer had to hold herself up straight by sheer willpower. Jonas placed a bowl in front of her. "Eat slowly," he said. "For both of you." Amya lifted the first spoonful with more steady hands, observing that she had swallowed it. The little girl blinked, then reached out for more, her strength gradually returning. Jonas leaned against the counter, watching them without intruding, without speaking, unless necessary. After a moment, Amya looked up at him. "Did you fix the door?" she said softly, noticing the reinforced latch. Jonas shrugged slightly. "I didn't want the cold getting in, but that wasn't the real reason." She seemed to understand him nonetheless. Her eyes lowered again, softer now. "Thank you, Jonas." He felt the weight of hearing his name on her lips. Cautious, grateful, cautious, but more afraid. For the first time in a long time, The cabin no longer felt like a place made for just one person. It no longer felt empty. And Jonas knew, watching them eat, that the story that had begun at his door the day before was far from over. The sun was slowly climbing over the valley, casting long bands of pale light across the yard. And Jonas felt the day returning to its usual rhythm. Only now, the rhythm wasn't just his. The air carried the cold death of late autumn, sharp enough to sting the fingers. He went out with an armful of tools, planning to split wood, and he checked the fence before the weather turned worse. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. Amya stepped out cautiously, holding onto his hip. Jonas didn't turn around immediately. He didn't want her to feel watched or rushed, but he spoke over her shoulder so she knew she wasn't an intruder. "You can stay inside where it's warm. No need to go out in the cold." Amya hesitated. He heard her in the small step before she answered. "I want to help," she said. Jonas finally turned. She was standing wrapped in the blanket he had given her. Her dress was still mending, drying near the fur inside. Her breath formed a light cloud in front of her as she adjusted her daughter's weight. Ona clung to her mother's neck, but the child's eyes were brighter today, less sunken. "You don't have to work to stay," Jonas said. Amya's expression tightened. "I need to do something. Sitting here makes me—" She didn't finish her sentence, but Jonas understood. Doing nothing meant waiting for trouble. Staying still meant waiting to be caught. He looked at the woodpile. "If you want, you can bring in some kindling, but only if you feel steady enough." Amya gave a small nod, relief seeping into her posture. She adjusted and walked carefully toward the woodpile that leaned against the cabin. Jonas watched her movements, noticing the stiffness in her ribs, the way she avoided bending over too much. She sorted through the smaller pieces and began to make a small pile with slow, controlled movements. Jonas went back to work. He laid a log upright and brought the axe down in a clean arc. The wood split cleanly. He prepared another, repeating the motion with measured force. The familiar rhythm anchored him. Each blow was precise, efficient, the kind of effort that required concentration without demanding thought. Between blows, he glanced at Amya. She was now kneeling near the pile, sorting the pieces by size, pulling the blanket tighter around his shoulders each time the wind passed. Jonas was watched from his mother's hip with silent curiosity, her eyes following every movement of the axe. It struck Jonas in an unexpected way. He had grown accustomed to doing everything on his own. When the pile was full, Amya stood slowly, balancing the child and the wood. Jonas moved forward without thinking. "I can take it," he said. She thought twice at first, reflex tension tightening her grip, but she let him take the pile. Their hands brushed for only a second, cold, thin, trembling. But Jonas felt that small contact settle inside him more than he would have thought possible. Inside the cabin, Jonas placed the wood near the fur while Amya settled Ona on the bed. She looked around for something else to do. He immediately sensed her need to anchor herself in the space, to feel that she belonged. "There's a broom by the door," he said. "If you want to tidy up a bit." Amya nodded slightly. "I can do that." She swept slowly, careful with each movement, stopping when her ribs ached too much. Jonas didn't comment, he didn't rush her. He let her go at her own pace. His daughter watched from the bed as her small fingers played with the wooden horse Jonas had carved years before. The room filled with the simple sounds of a hearth, wood being swept, the fire crackling, tools being moved as Jonas checked the hinges and parts of his rifle. The silence wasn't empty. It had a purpose. It allowed space to breathe. After a while, Amya sat down by the fur and began mending her dress. Jonas noticed how she sewed with short, precise strokes, slowly working the needle through the torn seams. Her fingers trembled with fatigue, not lack of skill. "Have you ever worked with a needle before?" Jonas asked, glancing briefly at her. She nodded, her eyes fixed on her work. "I used to mend clothes in my village, mostly for women who didn't have the time." She paused, the needle suspended. "I enjoy doing this. It makes me feel useful." Jonah adjusted a hinge, testing its tension. It still is. She didn't respond right away, but her shoulders relaxed slightly. A small change, almost imperceptible unless you looked for it. Jonas surprised himself by noticing everything. Later, when Jonas went out to check the coral, Amya followed with Ona on her hip. She didn't approach, staying close to the